Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. If you are somebody that owns a business and wants to make an impression, and they always say the first impression is the most important one, you really got to pay attention to your branding and what you're putting out there. Even if you're just an individual that wants to up your personal brand, it's all about the visual. And I don't think I need to tell you about that. This thing called social media where, everything is a quick, easy to digest visual of things. We've got somebody that can help you out with that. Uber creative. She does everything from illustration, graphics, recording, and visual design, and so much more. And we're going to talk about all that today. Ashton Rodenhiser is with us on the program. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I am doing so well, Steve. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm just looking in the background. I see an illustration. It almost looks like either icons or avatars or something going on there. What's, I guess that would be to your left. What is that?
Yeah, so when I do live illustrations, I like to make sure that I include a lot of diversity in my drawings of people.
Cool.
So different hairstyles, different skin tones, birthmarks and moles and all that good stuff. So to try to allow people to feel like they are reflected in the drawings that I do. And I'm just not drawing the same type of person all of the time.
I love that. You're all inclusive, I guess.
Yeah. Inclusivity and accessibility in my work is really important to me, for sure.
What are people asking for at this moment, by and large? Like you get a lot of calls or requests for what? What would it be at the moment?
Yeah, so what I've been primarily doing professionally for almost 10 years now is what I call live illustration or graphic recording. There's a couple other terms for it, but those are the most common. And basically that's as speakers are talking at a conference, or you're having a meeting or some sort of board retreat or strategic planning session, basically where people are talking about really highly complex things. I am drawing out in pictures and synthesizing in words what people are saying in those meetings and presentations. And my job is, as they are talking, I am capturing in real time. So then when they're done, I'm pretty much done too. Now you have visual representation synthesized of what that person just said or what happened in that meeting and all of that good stuff. So that's been sort of my primary bread and butter for, like I said, almost 10 years. And I've captured over 2,500 presentations to date.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know that existed, and like really exciting. So give me that again. I have it, but let's give an example. Let's say big company is doing a conference and there's one particular topic. They're talking about those orange widgets. I don't know if you heard about the orange widgets. It's up and coming. It's really big right now. And there they are. A bunch of the key players are up there. Maybe doing symposiums in front of everybody. The meeting is going to go. This session, by the way, is about an hour.
Yeah.
Are you looped in either there or virtually? And what will they? Is it something that they see in real time, or is it something after the fact? If somebody wants to refer back, they're going to have that visual representation.
Great question. So both. So before the pandemic, I was 100% in person. So I would be carrying around large boards and gigantic rolls of paper and my big fancy markers between my fingers. And when I'm in the room, I'm usually set up sort of near the front. I make my own little wall with my boards, and it's usually like 4 feet by 8 feet long. And during that hour, I'm filling in live in real time as those people are speaking, and I'm trying to keep up. I'm trying to synthesize. If there's a Guinness World Record person out there, I'd love to apply for fastest handwriting or fastest drawing in the world or something. So that when people are hearing, right, it's engaging our brain in multiple ways. So when people are hearing the speakers up there talking for the hour, they're looking over to me and they're seeing me draw out what the speaker just said. So it's reinforcing the learning. So it's not just engaging from this creative sense. And now you have this gigantic mural basically at the end of that hour that people can take their selfies with and post on social and do all that fun stuff. But I like working with organizations and events that really care about deepening the learning that the attendees have. So you know, when we go to a conference, there's so much information, right? There could be like 10, 15, 20 more speakers. And how in the world are you going to remember all of that information and actually go back to your workplace and implement the wisdom that came out of that event or that meeting or whatever? So I'm there not just to help elevate it and bring it to life in a creative sense and have these like, you know, you could walk down the hallway and now you have all these like murals at your event that's really engaging. But it's helping deepening the learning and the memory retention of the people in the room. And it's not about me, but it's about the wisdom that's coming out of the orange widgets. So everybody remembers what happened with the orange widgets and what's going on. And I'm always so fascinated to hear use cases, how people use them after an event as well, you know, in their board meetings, and to showcase like maybe why it was an investment to go and send your employee to that conference, because they can have these graphics and say like, this is what I learned. So there's so much long lasting impact after the event as well, which I'm sure we could get into a later time, but you know, that immediacy in the moment. So when I'm doing it in person, I'm typically doing it with markers and paper, actually analog on a giant piece of paper. But since the pandemic switched, I had to completely change my business model March of 2020. And I have been primarily virtual since then. I still have been doing I've been getting more back in person the last year or so. So instead of seeing like me on my video here, you would actually see my drawing screen. So in the same sense of having it in person, I would be drawing out virtually on my digital whiteboard, basically. And then the same thing after that hour, you would have the visual representation of what was just said.
How truly unique. And what I get from this is you could have a PowerPoint. Half the time people are like, whatever. And what you're doing, as you're describing it, it's almost as if you're an outside observer, picking up the
Yes.
key points and adding visual representation to it. So it's like bam, 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 easy
Yeah.
to digest, because that's what we're all about today. I call it the fast food, the Amazon world that we live in.
Yeah.
But also blended with, it's almost sort of like you're a court artist.
People ask me that all the time. I'm like, not really.
Yeah, but
Not really in a sense, but
you're capturing it. Uh, you're not necessarily doing caricatures of the key players, the CEO, whatever,
yeah,
i.e., person on the stand, the judge, and all of that. But
yeah,
kind of, it's an event in real time, and you're taking
yeah.
care of it, and you're moving. Those artists like.
Exactly. I think those are probably like that's the most thing that people can try to relate it to for sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and in that situation, when you talk about speed and efficiency, you can't record a court event. Now, granted, we could record something that's going on in a meeting, but all it's going to be is a video. Okay, I get.
Yeah. And like, who's going to go back and watch the videos? Nobody.
Yeah.
Who's going to go back? Like, people like, oh, my slides are available. Who's going back and looking at those slides? Very, very few people. And the slides don't have context a lot of the times. And you miss those. Like, I actually try not to pay attention as much as I can to the slides. And I'm listening to what they're saying,
Yeah.
because what they're saying is going to be different from a slide. And if they do a PowerPoint, like I could basically be a professional presentation designer at this point, because I have lots of opinions on how to design a good presentation.
Right.
But I'm listening to what they're saying rather than charts and things that they're putting on a slide, right? So it's about in the moment what they're saying, and you're not necessarily going to get that looking at the slide deck later on.
100%, because final thought on this is that during that presentation on the orange widgets, the CEO may say to somebody on the panel that these orange widgets are going to be more popular than the sprangulator, and
Right.
whatever that is. But that might not be in the actual, let's say the the PowerPoint presentation. That's just an afterthought. But you would pick
Yeah.
up on that and punch that up as this will overtake the sprangulator at some point. That the CEO said that.
Yeah, and there's lots of things that happen where there's not a presentation, right? There's no slide deck, right? There's panel sessions, right? There's meetings. It's very my process is very same but very different when I'm that when I'm capturing a presentation where I'm capturing a meeting of like maybe 20 people in a room and trying to reflect everybody's voice, right? Making sure that everybody feels heard, valued, that this meeting was worth the investment in time to be there, right? And having a visual representation of what was said can not just help people feel valued and heard and that it was worth time, but have that, okay, now what do we do? Right? Using as an accountability tool, hang it in the office. This is what we said we were going to do for the next 2 years or next 6 months or whatever it is. Right. So like there's sort of like, I love it because there's so many dual purposes. And I love what you said about being the outside perspective, because that's one thing I think I didn't realize until I was a couple of years into it. That's what I really love. I love actually not knowing anything.
Yeah.
And listening for the group as a whole without, because if I was embedded in the orange widget industry, I'm going to have my own like personal opinions and bias and all of these things going into it. But like, I don't know anything about orange widgets.
Right.
No idea. Right.
Exactly.
I'm listening to what you're saying. And sometimes conversations are uncomfortable. And I have to tell clients, like, I'm going to capture what was said. And I don't like to edit things out. Like, I charge an extra fee if you want me to edit it, because it's what happened in the room at that moment in time. And you might say, our organization is racist. It might say things that you might not like to hear, but I'm going to capture it. Right. Sometimes I have to forewarn people, like what happens in the room. It's important for me to try to have a true reflection and represent those voices, because if now I'm editing things out, or if they tell me, oh, if they mention this, don't capture it, then I know they're not the right people for me, because sometimes oftentimes conversations can be uncomfortable in situations like that. Right. And I'm there to try to reflect, right, of what was really a true representation. And sometimes that means capturing things that people might not want to hear.
Well, guess what? If they did a live stream of the Orange Widget event and something was said that was a little subjectionable, it's live. And, or a Facebook Live, that's the same thing. So, yeah, wow. I honestly didn't even know this whole concept existed. Super cool.
Yeah.
And I have to imagine that you do other graphics and visuals. Let's say do you do caricatures?
I do like my little people, but I don't necessarily do caricatures. Like if someone's stalking, or sometimes I'll draw like a little cartoony kind of person for them. But because everything's so quick and I only have so much time, I just don't have time to do a caricature. Like, and because a lot of my work is the live illustration, I have this hour to do this thing. But it is what it is. Sometimes people will be like, oh, can you do this ahead of time? Then I'll do that. But when it's in the moment, you can only do what you can do within that time frame. Yeah.
So I should have made that a little clearer. When I said caricatures, I mean just in general, not during these presentations. That's a whole
Right.
thing right there.
Not so much. Not so much. I feel like this is my zone of genius. It's like I'm basically a professional listener with an artistic flair, right? So there's lots of artists out there that are way better than me. There's artists out there that can draw realistic things and things that are like characters, but it's not necessarily my forte. I have been asked to do things from time to time, but it's not my zone of genius for sure.
So when you do one of these presentations, what medium is it on? What is they're watching it in real time on screens during the event, is that correct?
If I'm virtual, yes.
If you're virtual, okay.
Yeah.
After the fact, do you supply a video or something, a Zoom or something like that with what you were doing?
Sometimes I will if they request it, but a lot of times I'm being streamed over, so they have a recording anyways.
Okay.
So like if there's the presenter, then there's usually me and maybe their slides or whatever. So oftentimes they already have the recording, but I certainly provide recordings. Like I just, record my screen basically and provide that after. I don't like to edit it too much. Sometimes I'll speed it up. You could take a half an hour and do it like a speed draw, and now it's 30 seconds.
Sure.
But it's really important to me to honor the process of how it happens. And that includes me erasing stuff, me changing things, me moving things around when I'm doing it virtually. That's part of the beauty of like the part of it where you get to see the mess and how it unfolds into this cohesive drawing. In person, you can't move things around. It's harder to change a mistake, all of that stuff. I have my ways. I've got my ways to change things if I have to, but it's not ideal. So I have to be a little bit extra careful when I'm in person. When I've got papers to pen, or sorry, markers to paper, where I can't make those edits as easily. I've been very spoiled now that I've moved a lot to virtual, that I can move things around and change things at any time.
So who would be a perfect person for you? Companies that do presentations? What do you think?
Yeah, a lot of my client base are in technology. I do a lot in cybersecurity, a ton in cybersecurity for some reason. They just love me, and I love them. They're a beautiful community.
Wow.
I do a lot with software developers, software engineers. I've been doing a lot in like healthcare retention and recruitment in my own community because it's a big issue here. Yeah, basically, I feel like I've basically worked in almost every industry at this point, education, libraries, like just pretty much anything that you can think of. And if you're looking to elevate a meeting, this is a great option to do that. And if you're, working through some sort of facilitated type engagement where you're trying to gather people to reflect and maybe make a strategic plan or some sort of brainstorming for your organization, nonprofit or Fortune 500, like it can kind of work in any realm, which is like fun. Like I said, I certainly have my client base that I end up working a lot in, but I'm definitely not limited to. And I think that's something that I really love about as well, because I get to learn so much about so many different industries and all of those learnings. And then there's, to be honest with you, out of all the industries that I've worked in over like 10 years, there's always themes. There's always themes. And all of these industries is like how do we work together? How do we communicate better? It's like a lot of the same issues. A lot of the industries have a lot of the same issues they're trying to solve.
Wow. Interesting.
And a lot of it is about how do we communicate? How do we work together? How do we break down silos? Oh my gosh, how many silos have I drawn in my life? Like so many.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated. This is not only is this the short version of a meeting, giving you the key points from an outside observer, it's just cool. I got to tell you,
Yeah.
to be very honest with you, it's it's like walking away from an event and they gave you, as a participant, they gave you a little tchotchke. Well, this is sort of that, but this is valuable, truly valuable, because it's all the key points graphically represented, sort of a little bit of a timeline, maybe from left to right. I'm gathering because I've looked at some of your samples, your portfolio on your website. Short of that, do you offer any other graphic services, or this is like your main thing? If somebody wanted some other kind of stuff done.
It's definitely my main thing. It has been for a long time.
Sure.
But I have been getting into more different types of medium of information. For me, it's like however information is presented. So I've been asked to do like blog posts. So I'll take a written content and create one or a series of different graphics that represent content in that form. Webinars and podcasts, like other types of forms that are still audio based. But yeah, those are sort of the main ones. I do from time to time do sort of video explainers, where there's a script and it's 2 minutes long or whatever, and there's a video that's unfold. That's a whole different process for me because there's a lot of planning involved. It's not in the moment, real time kind of thing. Yeah, the process of that is completely different. Obviously, I'm still using similar like drawing and synthesizing skills, but those are sort of some of the other realms that I get asked to work in.
Wow. How did this all begin for you, Ashton?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I left high school, just ended up going to community college because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my parents hadn't, didn't have money set aside for me to go to university or anything. And I was like, well, if I'm spending my own money, I'm going to community college. And I ended up, after I was finished there, I ended up getting a job at a nonprofit family resource center. And a few years into there, I transitioned into a facilitation role. And I absolutely fell in love with the world of facilitation. I didn't even know it existed. I thought at one point I might want to be a teacher. But facilitation is like way better than being a teacher, in my opinion, because you don't actually have to know anything. You just have to hold the group and walk them through asking the right questions, getting the information that they already know out, verbalized, so they can have reflection on their own learning and learning from other people in a room. I really, really fell in love with that group process and how people come move through situations and things to get to the other side through that facilitation process. And if there's any facilitators out there, like, I love all of you. It's like such a special skill that I think people don't always honor the importance of that skill. So fell in love with facilitation. And a few years after that, I just learned about graphic facilitation. And I was like, what's this? And basically the rest was history. I took like a 1-day course and I totally fell in love and was like, this is the perfect blend of my creative side, which I've always been very creative, always done something. Like I would in high school be like sitting in the library knitting. Like that was me. I was like the crafting kid. So it was a really beautiful combination of my creative side and my side that I always secretly wanted to be an artist, and this facilitation world where you can like help elevate people's messages and making sure they feel like creating a safe space, making sure they feel heard and all of that. It was just like a perfect blending of the two worlds that kind of came together. Not many people know that this even exists as like a thing that you could do for a job. So like there was no way that I would even known when I was younger. The default of this, whether it's a good or a bad thing, as you're basically forced to create a business because no one's hiring graphic recorders, graphic facilitators, live illustrators. No one's hiring internally. Over the years, I've only heard like maybe 2 or 3 companies that have hired in-house people. A lot of in the 90s, there was a pretty huge resurgence of this work. A lot of consulting companies were utilizing this skill. But even then, they weren't always, full-time with those companies. They were still sort of subcontracted. So yeah, so I was sort of like, I had to kind of decide, like, at one point, do I really want to go all in on this? Is this going to be a side thing that, my facilitator friends will bring me in on projects from time to time? Or do I want to actually build a business and like go all in on this? And yeah, I did did that. Obviously decided to do that. So
It's one of the most unique things, and I'm Ashton, I really mean this. One of the most unique things I've ever heard of. And it's and that I'm trying to factor myself out because I wanted to be a syndicated cartoonist and came that close when I was like 22, 24. But I had
right,
already been doing radio. I got the
right.
big job I wanted, and I abandoned the graphic side of it. But I have a marketing company too now, so that side of me still exists in me. But I did the same thing you did. I went to community college.
Right.
Same thing. Trying to, kind of figured it out. But you're like a trailblazer in all of this. And I didn't know when I saw graphic recording we were going to talk about today. Well, I wasn't like 100% sure.
Right.
I wish we did a screen share, to show, some of the stuff you've done. I'm sure you've got tons of samples of
Mhm.
these. Very unique. Yeah. So anybody who owns a company is connected to a company, and yeah, might have been kind of cool in the 90s, but with everything virtual now, whoa, I mean, the world is yours. These are, what we're doing now, and all of these presentations are going on by the tens of thousands every single day. And your passion is there. And by the way, you have great handwriting. People tell me that because I've wanted to be a cartoonist, but you do. You have to, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah, hey, your handwriting is pretty foundational. It has to be good. It has to be because people need to be able to read it later, right?
Right.
It has to be. It's pretty foundational core skill.
But
And where I worked with kids forever, so I had already had pretty decent handwriting when I got into it. So yeah, and as I got into it, I didn't actually draw. Like I was very creative. I didn't draw a whole lot going into it, but I already had the listening and the thinking from being a facilitator down. So it was actually not a huge leap for me. I just had to build up because it's basically, you're an interpreter in a visual way, right? So where you would have an interpreter in a room for a language, I'm interpreting in a visual way. So I've spent, all this time, all these years building up your own visual language, your own visual vocabulary. So when people say something, you're like, okay, I already know how to draw this, do, right?
got
You
it.
know,
Yeah. And your other valuable skill, aside from all the representation, is you're able to take something, digest it, and then hand it back in a very short form. And that's key
exactly.
for what
Yeah.
you do. Yeah.
Exactly. Like you had said, it's like we live in this world now where we want instant gratification. So if we can present that information to people and like you can look at it in 10 seconds, be like, oh yeah. And I had done when I had started playing around with this, was working on a project at the time, and 6 months and I had done some drawing. I didn't know what I was doing. I just threw some paper on a wall. I was like, da da da. And then 6 months later, I pulled it out and looked at it, and I was so blown away of what I can remember. Even things that weren't on the page, I could remember. I remembered the room, how it was set up. And I've had clients tell me, they're like, why can I remember where people sat in the room and how can I remember that with just by looking at your drawing? And I'm like, it's the way that our brain makes connections and the way that our brain makes and remembers things
Yeah.
that, you're even going to remember the experience beyond what was captured. You might look at that graphic that was that presentation and be like, oh yeah, and I remember I talked to so and so after when we went and took a picture of it. Like you're going to remember things beyond, and you, like, I would hope that most people care about people learning something from their events or their meetings. So why not include something like this?
So
Like,
cool. And it's
yeah.
also, we have literally seconds left here, but to me, it's also like almost like a sort of like a flow chart of how
Mhm.
the events went. This segged into this, and you graphically represent it. I'm going to go out here and say, if any company is doing any type of presentation with their team, you have to do this
Mhm.
because it's the easy to digest version of your meeting, and it's so beneficial. How do we find you, Ashton?
Yeah, you can find me at mindsedcreative.ca, and all my socials are on there. I'm most active on Twitter. So I always like post on things, and I think just because a lot of my folks are technology, they love Twitter still, thankfully. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. Those are the two platforms that I'm involved with the
Yeah,
most.
I would imagine LinkedIn is huge, or can be huge for you because it's very business connected. Uh, Thanks
Exactly.
for being here today.
You're
So cool.
welcome.
Yeah, I love learning about stuff, and you're doing the same thing when you're at a presentation. You're learning about widgets, whatever it might be. Again, your website. I want everybody to hear it clear. What is it?
Yeah, mindsedcreative.ca.
Got it. Thanks,
Mhm.
Ashton. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.